Is she gonna flag you? Is she gonna flag you? Oh, you're waiting for somebody to come in. Yeah.
Good evening. Dave Russell, Code Officer. Thanks, sir. I'm glad you all came, that we're getting towards the end of this planning procedure. And I just want to introduce Kat Bloodman with Associated Planning Solutions. She's been bearing with me for a year now. Things done a wonderful job, and we're just now to the point where we need final input from everybody, the council, especially because we're talking about spending people's money.
Well, thank you, David. Yes, we are getting near the tail end, after tonight, and I'll go through some of the next steps, but just very briefly, after tonight, I will take any and all edits, refine the document, and send it to the state for review before a public hearing at the planning board, at which a recommendation, we hope, would ultimately be made to the council, and then a council hearing after that. So that's kind of the next steps involved. So tonight is very important from my perspective to make sure there are no deal breakers from your perspective, and that we cover as many of those bases as possible. So I have probably too many slides, but it's going to help in terms of walking you through the 200-page document that is before you. So I'll get going and just let you know at any point, if you have a question you want to stop me, please feel free. So tonight I want to recap what we've done so far. This PowerPoint is based upon the PowerPoint that we used at a meeting last month, but I've edited it based upon the majority of the comments that came that night. We're going to spend some time reviewing the vision statement, as well as the goals, policies, and actions for each of the subject areas in the plan, and spend some time, probably the bulk of the time, looking at the future land use plan and making sure that you're clear and you're fine with the direction of the future land use. There's a draft capital investment plan that we'll spend a little bit of time on in some of these slides, looking at maybe a prioritization process and different ways to fund your capital investment plan. Spend a little bit of time discussing and then going over the next steps. So where we've been, everything in green we did last spring and last summer. So we got organized, we collected and analyzed data, and mashed everything up. And then in September, we came, spent 3 days in the community, working with the staff people, working with opinion leaders in the community, and doing little workshops, working on trying to come up with, okay, what's the broad vision? And we presented a vision at the end of that 3-day event, a draft, and that from that vision statement, we were then able to start really drafting the goals, policies, and actions for each of the subject chapters. Finally, we sent that out end of November to the staff and the council. I know it was big, it was a lot, probably some downloading issues, I understand that. And then, so that's one of the reasons why I felt this meeting was going to be important as well. And then in January, we drafted an implementation plan, the actual future land use plan, the capital major investment plan, and regional coordination strategies. So everything that you see highlighted in red on this slide is in chapter 1 of your document. So we tried to put everything in that to just keep it simple. Obviously, the other chapters get into all the background, all the data gathering, and all the goals and policies are there as well. But if you want a quick look, just go to chapter 1. So I think you all know this, but just a few points on the difference between the vision and the plan. The vision is the dream. The plan is the blueprint. The vision is the possibilities, and the plan is the roadmap. So, and then there's another category, the ordinance or the other policies that you have. But for right now, this is what we're looking at, the vision versus the plan and what the two components are. Back in September, red is just to stand out, but these are the key points that we brought up based upon all of the input that we received over the 3 days that we were here and based upon our summer's worth of analysis of all the documentation. So I'm not going to read these next few slides. They're just there for history's sake, and we'll spend some time going over what we actually have included in the draft vision. So again, you know, highlighted words, collaborated, partners, getting out of poverty, transportation services, strategic investments, protecting resources, focusing on Marsh Island as the place to grow, implementing the downtown plan, things like that. So that's what, again, back in September, those are the key points that were made. In addition, at that meeting on the 30th of September, the items in blue under the discussion points, we were asked to add those. And when we went back and looked at it, there are a couple of things still missing, but we know we can add those things before the final document is sent off to the state. Okay, so here we are. This is what's in your document in front of you now. So the vision talks about having a vibrant community, making sure that most of the growth occurs on Marsh Island. Crossed out French there because people at the meeting late January said, well, there's already so much there, really probably can't be growing too much more there. So that's the only reason that's stricken. Joining economic and community development in one strategy, we talked about. Strengthening the partnership with the University of Maine for R&D on agribusiness and forest products. Improving the image of the community. And by improving the image, improving people's own sense of feeling and pride about the community, as well as people from outside looking at the community and feeling that same pride. We identified in the draft vision that, you know, by 2035, this community will lead the state in terms of small business, small manufacturing type businesses. And that that you would have distinguished the roles of downtown and Stillwater Avenue so they don't end up competing with one another, which is very important. We pulled a lot of stuff from the downtown document, downtown plan that you just did, but we threw in a few other things that we thought, again, that we heard about at the discussions in September that you would want to think about, maybe, you know, doing some kind of a recreation or cultural education center in the downtown, focusing on maybe a partnership with the Penobscot Nation, looking at possibly a future relocation of public safety building. If that becomes a high priority parcel for more economic development, might be worth thinking about a relocation. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. Citywide, looking at improving sidewalks, making sure the mill is redeveloped. We suggested that the city may want to enter into an investment partnership for the mill to help with its redevelopment. In 2035, the technology and energy parks will be vibrant, will be well underway. Focusing on the 3-ring binder, maybe some kind of a solar array at the DeWitt Airport that helps with power generation. We had forgotten to include a new public works garage because in the 1995 plan it suggested that you needed a new public works garage. So we said, geez, maybe we probably should not ignore that this time around. So we put it in the vision that there would be one by 2035. And then we had also not included a statement about the importance of quality education and educational facilities that you currently have, and maintaining those and increasing their excellence as time goes on. More about the keywords in the draft vision: redeveloping the older neighborhoods. You've done so well with that you're an all-America city in 2035. Creating a financial incentive program for housing rehab as well as for new housing development. Suggested that maybe the service clubs, who may be struggling due to membership and trying to maintain their buildings, collaborate and create one joint organization, but now their vacated buildings could be used for something else. And hopefully you won't need a homeless shelter in 2035, but at this point in time, it's something to be thinking about. A neighborhood watch would have been created by then. The Orono Old Town Land Trust. I've just created a new entity. I'm not sure how Orono feels about that, but part of this plan is talking about regional coordination and making sure that you work together toward common goals. The recreation program and the Y collaborate on a Juniper Ridge recreation facility. You know, again, these are all ideas, and in the vision, they're things to work toward. They're not a mandate. They're all things to work toward. Okay, so very quickly, in terms of the goals that are in the document, they're all the same goals that were in your 1995 plan. We did not change a word. So that's easy, and they reflect what the state requires. In terms of policies, we maintained a number, we expanded some, and we added some new ones. And then finally, added some actions. Many of them are continue to do what you've been doing for the last 20 years or more, and we've highlighted those in this PowerPoint in green, so you don't have to worry about those being anything new. So, in terms of the economy chapter, that's the state goal: promote an economic climate that increases job opportunities and overall economic well-being. Motherhood and apple pie, and that's what the local goal is as well. So, in terms of policies, everything underlined is a policy, okay? And the square bullets beneath those would be the actions that the plan would recommend. So expanding the mission of the LLC, expanding its membership, adding strategies regarding partnerships and housing needs and livability and wages and poverty concerns, strengthening the humane connection, and then seeking funding for redevelopment, mill redevelopment master plan. Encouraging small business creation and growth, continue the revolving loan fund, expand it where it's appropriate. And the catch-all, review and revise ordinances to make sure that that your community is business friendly. And then continue to encourage development of the business parks, working with FAA, working with UMaine and the city of Orono, town of Orono. And then explore a partnership for the mill site. Couple more slides, I think, on the economy. Stillwater Avenue, if there are any questions on any of these pieces as we go, don't hesitate.
Kat,
Yes.
I kind of questioned the wisdom of expanding the LLC. I think it's important to have the community development function and the LLC, economic development function, integrated and coordinated. But there's already 15 members of the LLC, and I'm not sure that group is the one that's best suited to really scrutinize and move forward, the individual projects. That seems better suited for a community development committee, which we have a downtown committee that does that sort of thing now. So, that's just my thought.
Yeah.
With 15 members, it's really hard to tear into the details of anything.
Sure. I understand the challenges of local committees. And I think, you know, it may be something that you want to at least have conversations between the Community Development Committee and the LLC and figure out how you can work better together, because the goals are not exclusive. You know, they really are complementary to one another, and that's the key that we're trying to suggest here, is to make sure that there's an understanding that it's not all about the jobs. It's, you gotta have the housing for people as well, and the amenities that go with the housing. So, you know, it's up to you how you want me, you as a community want me to address this issue, but good point.
Pat, and I don't think myself it's a bad idea to expand the LLC. I think we need a more blended, we need to have different sectors represented, I think. So I don't think it's a bad idea.
Okay.
One of the things, back up a couple of slides, when I read through this today, there was a section in there that talked about converting the railway to bike and walking paths. I think if we're talking about taking the existing railway and doing away with it, I think that would be a big mistake.
And I don't think that's that's not what's intended.
Okay.
It's, and the
Talking about
state
using
wouldn't allow it.
corridor and having a parallel.
Rails and trails.
Okay, fine.
So the rails would stay
Yeah.
because, you know, and the state, the last time they allowed a rail to be completely converted to trail was the last time. Because they understand the value of the rail network.
Right.
So they're not gonna let it go.
Okay, good.
So it would be, this would be a trail alongside. Okay. Okay. Okay to go on to Stillwater? All right. Clarifying the role of Stillwater Avenue, expanding the commercial land around it. We know that's something you're striving for, and working on improving its character. An important consideration is to define its focus and making sure that it's not so auto-oriented that you end up creating congestion problems that you cannot solve. It's already stressed. So try to diversify the uses on Stillwater Avenue, including allowing some residential worker-based housing so that people can walk to work, people can walk to the school, and so on, okay? Because where do you go? Where, you know, how are you going to deal with the traffic problems if it's all auto-oriented, okay? And allow for relief with new travel alignments. Maybe, you know, walking, bicycling trails, you've got some of that now. Maybe there should be some parallel roads to Stillwater Avenue. And, you know, that's something that you can brainstorm some more about. Making sure that the home occupations, the type and the size are balanced for the neighborhood and not end up being too commercial so that they take away from the from the residential feel. In terms of downtown revitalization, you know, big thing, incorporate by reference the downtown plan that you just finished last summer and implemented as well. Comparing with Stillwater Avenue, making sure that you're defining that economic focus separate from what you're expecting to accomplish on Stillwater. Obviously seek funding to implement it. We've already talked about home businesses not competing with storefronts, and avoid large unplanned activities. Motherhood and apple pie, I think you already have that down. A lot of the stuff that you're gonna see in here are things that the state is looking for. It's a no-brainer for you all, but the state's gonna wanna be able to say, yep, they did this and we're checking this off, okay? Expanding ecotourism policy. Tying your ecotourism to the river and the outdoor areas. You've got such rich resources here. You're already doing some of that, keep going, I think is what this is trying to say. and then continue to seek funding and partnerships. Any questions, comments about economy, or do I keep sliding into housing? I'm gonna keep going. The state goal for housing, the local goal for housing, almost word for word, except for Maine and Old Town. So that's pretty standard stuff. In terms of the policies, encourage and promote adequate workforce housing. We already talked about expanding the LLC role. There's some, two ways to look at that. So you'll have to decide how you want it to ultimately be resolved in the plan. Maintain, enact, or amend the growth area. Marsh Island is what we're suggesting is your primary growth area in the comprehensive plan. Make sure that you're going to allow more density, maybe smaller lots, maybe more number of living units, narrower setbacks, things like that, to encourage more development in that area and not push it out into the rural areas where you don't have the services or where it's more expensive for you to provide services. We're suggesting that you provide incentives for building on Marsh Island as opposed to the rural areas, and make your lot sizes larger out in the rural areas. They probably are moderately sized now. You may want to consider increasing those a little bit. We talk about considering the use of impact fees, and there was a little bit of debate about that on January 26th, and I'm sure you probably all have some opinions about that here tonight. It's a tool that can be used. It doesn't mean that you have to use it. Because it's in the plan, if you decide 5-10 years down the road that, yep, you need to do that, you can. If you don't have it in there and you decide you want to choose to do it, you're going to have to amend your comp plan before you can. Okay?
That's the one I highlighted,
All right.
because as councils, we do get phone calls about the high taxes out there at the lake. So I just didn't know what that meant, what was the idea of that?
Right.
Was it services as far as like plowing? I guess I didn't, because I hadn't been at the meeting, so I didn't know what that
Right.
meant.
Impact fees applies to any new development the day that the impact fee ordinance comes into place. It's not retroactive.
So strictly new development.
It's only new development,
Okay.
okay? And it's a one-time fee that gets applied with a building permit,
Okay.
okay? All right. We're suggesting to eliminate the seasonal housing zone on Pushaw and change its name. We'll talk about that again in a little bit later section in the future land use plan. We're suggesting creating a low-interest loan program for rehab, as well as to promote not just weatherization, but energy efficiency. So we broadened that as a result of discussion at the last meeting. Ensuring that land use tools encourage quality, affordable, and rental housing. And there was a typo in that, so we just adjusted that last time, making sure that we allow one accessory unit per per family home, and making sure that mobile homes are allowed as if they were a stick-built home.
Can I ask a question about that quickly?
Sure.
In the copy that I have, it says in growth areas. I would like to see that in all areas, including our rural areas.
Which part?
The apartment, accessory apartment.
Okay.
Because the idea behind that when the state passed was for the elderly community as like an in-law apartment.
Right.
So I'd like to see that including in our rural areas, even though I'd like to see the growth in the growth area, but because it benefits our senior citizens, I think it should be appropriate pretty much everywhere we can fit it. So maybe not French Island, but the rest of the world.
Okay.
Yeah, can you clarify accessory apartment? Is it in an apartment or is it an apartment?
The way that it's conceptualized in the plan, it's just an apartment, so it doesn't have to be in-law.
Because now you're breaking all kinds of zoning.
Can't be a rental unit.
Your current zoning, right.
So that would have, but you're looking at street frontages and lot size here. even zoning districts might cause a problem.
So,
Where is that on?
I guess, just so I understand, are you suggesting that we specify it to be in-law apartments versus a standard apartment? Or do we just apply that to the growth area, unlike what, I forget your name, I'm sorry?
Lee.
Lee is suggesting for the entire community.
No, what I'm suggesting is there are zoning districts created for a purpose based on lot sizes. And now you're going to ingest areas that might not
Right.
have planned for that.
Well, this was,
5.2.
the intent was to have this apply in the growth area where you want more density to happen anyway. Lee was suggesting that it be applicable to areas outside as well.
Right, and my thought process behind that is the state adopted this because the Speaker of the House office created like an aging council, and this was one of their recommendations for like the Keep Me Home initiative.
Right.
So senior citizens and loved ones could move into or an in-law apartment next to home and stay close to their family.
And we do allow in-law apartments,
All over.
all
Okay.
of them. And it's basically defined as you have no kitchen. You have to eat with the family.
I see. Yeah.
So we're doing, David, I'm confused, we're doing this now?
Yes. And what that does is turn it into one that's no longer required for the family member in an apartment house where it wasn't zoned for. If you do away the kitchen aspect.
Okay. So, I don't have resolution on that, and that's okay, but I will make a note that that is something that we'll need to further discuss, I guess, at the planning board.
Because it's a little counterintuitive to the whole density issue that you talk about, trying to do smaller lots, more people in those projected
Smaller areas, right,
Yeah.
right.
Which this would allow for that.
Exactly.
To your point, it's gonna influence zoning significantly.
Right. So I'll connect with you on that a little bit more.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Okay to move on? The top two policies were added at the January 26th meeting, making sure that we have a statement in the plan that says, encourage redevelopment of abandoned homes, promote a cost-benefit analysis with a tax base, from a tax-based perspective, before a decision is made regarding demolition. So that was added last time. And then promote owner occupancy in multifamily dwellings. Work with the housing authority, a committee or coalitions to create financial and home ownership education program, as well as explore creative home ownership mechanisms. So those are, again, those are ideas, those are things to work toward. They're not mandates, but they kind of expand upon the concept of how to make housing here more attractive. We had suggested encouraging and supporting regional housing coalitions, and the idea was create your own housing committee. If you don't already have one, create a housing committee whose job it is to really look at what kinds of housing issues you need to deal with, coordinate with the LLC, you know, that kind of thing, to make sure that it's, that student housing concerns are addressed, that public safety issues are addressed, and so on. In the state law, it says that each plan has to seek to achieve 10% of all new homes in your community within the life of the plan as affordable. And there are tables in chapter 5 of the document that talk about what is an affordable home for Old Town versus what it might be for Brewer and Bangor and so on. So that's a requirement. We also noted that there's a pretty low number of 2-bedroom homes. through the analysis that we did, you might want to consider whether or not you need to have more homes built with that number of bedrooms. We were silent on the whole notion of student housing until January 26th, when the folks there said, we really ought to have something in the plan about student housing. And, but they were very clear, they wanted to avoid dormitory-style complexes. They wanted to encourage students to rent or buy some of the vacant housing that's here, and wanted to make sure that we expanded on the definition of student housing to include those other folks. So, so we would amend the plan with that in mind. Moving on to culture and recreation. Same state goal that was there in 1995, same local goal as well. Maintain support for the library, maintain the fee system for non-residents or obtain some kind of fee from abutting towns, and keep the building in good shape. Very straightforward, standard stuff. Of recreational and cultural facilities and programs by encouraging collaboration, ensuring the adequate upkeep of the existing facilities, expanding into surplus buildings near neighborhoods as needed if logical and feasible, and develop a needs assessment for existing facilities. And you'll see that needs assessment, at least in terms of public buildings, mentioned again a little bit later on. So those are the policies and actions. A few more: assuring and providing public access, continue to expand partnerships, continue to look for funding, protect the historic and archaeological resources. You're already doing that through your ordinances. Maintain your resource protection zone. Make sure your ordinances are identifying the concerns around prehistoric and archaeological resources. And because many of these resources are not exactly identified, sometimes the state has grants to help with an inventory of historic properties to make sure that they might qualify for historic designation and historic tax credits and so on. So you may want to seek some funding for that. Public facilities and services. I'm going to keep going until I see a hand or hear a voice. I'm not going to read these word for word. They're the same as they were some time ago. Okay, so policy: efficiently meet the identified public facility and service needs. Study the condition of public buildings, including schools. That was added last time, so that would be a coordination effort with RSU 34. And assess the needs. Explore co-location of future facilities to enhance their efficiency. And an example that was given was with regards to school and recreational facilities. There are probably other examples, but that was one that came up. Plan for needed improvements. Continue to use the reserve accounts. We'll talk a little bit about that in the public investment strategy section as well. Locate new public facilities, including utility extensions, where 75% of the growth is anticipated. In other words, as close to Marsh Island as possible, if not on Marsh Island. So if you're going to be rebuilding a public works garage, keep it on Marsh Island, which it is now, right? So that's the concept behind that. Again, it just promotes the intensification and of your growth area as opposed to spreading out and spreading out. Somebody did bring up last time that not all public facilities need to be in the growth area, so be open to that, and we can include a clause to there as well. Continue to the pay-as-you-throw. We added zero-sort recycling at the last meeting. Those are two programs that people feel very good about here, so that's great. And create and expand a coalition of social service delivery organizations. That was a topic that came up at our small group discussions back in September. And of any of the groups that we talked with, there were 5 or 6 or 7 who were here, and they were all talking about, this is what we do, this is what we do, this is what we do, and there was some overlap, and there was some gaps. And so they recognized the importance of talking to one another so that they could make sure that there were as few holes as possible, and they may be able to decide, okay, that maybe should go in your bailiwick so we don't have to do it, blah, blah, blah. So putting it in the plan may encourage that as well. So that's why that's there. Again, in terms of public facilities, making sure they promote and support growth in the designated areas. All of these in green are things you're already doing. So continue the water district and pollution control efforts consistent with the future land use plan. Continue to implement the MS4 plan. Make sure river water quality remains high, etc. Ensure your ordinances protect all existing potential public water sources. That's a statement. And you know where the water sources or potential water sources are, so your ordinances would require that any new development show that they're not impacting that. And support economic LLC efforts in the waste to energy regarding Juniper Ridge. And exploring the merits of alternative energy sources, again, a solar array or whatever it might be that you, solar panels on buildings, just being able to encourage that. Lots of goals in the natural resources and forestry and agriculture section in the state and local section of the existing plan. It's all stuff that you have been doing. So continue to protect the wetlands, continue to protect surface waters. There had been, on the last bullet there, we know that there had been a suit regarding the Penobscot River water quality. We know some of that has been resolved. The idea here is just monitor it, make sure you're up to speed on it, and I know that you are, but it's reflected in the plan and acknowledged. We all know, don't develop in the floodplains, or if you do, don't do so in a way that will create more flood damage. Protecting the aquifers and protecting soils as well. So all stuff that you're doing now, this is all stuff that was in the last plan. Protect and manage unique wildlife areas. Continue to administer the shoreland zoning the way that you have been. Require mitigation measures when site plan and subdivisions exert significant impact on the wildlife resources and their travel corridors. So that would be a new addition to your ordinances. Protecting waterfowl nesting areas, that's a continue. And ensuring protection of all natural resources, here's the catch-all, especially when you're reviewing site plans and subdivisions. Planning board already does that, but so this is the catch-all statement. Let's see. And this is the policy having to do with the importance of agriculture and forestry in the community. Continue to use site plan review and subdivision to protect those resources that have been determined to be important. Lots of discussion at our September meetings about local farmers markets, but we know there's a regional food hub discussion happening in Bangor, so we're saying coordinate with them, make sure that, you know, everybody's on the same page. Assure your ordinances provide adaptive reuse of abandoned commercial and industrial buildings so that they maybe could be used for agriculture and forestry, technology, research, and so on. Work with UMaine, that's pretty straightforward. And then added at the last meeting, create a forest management committee and explore creating the position of a tree warden. Those are in state law, at least the tree warden is in state law, and a committee would help with that. Develop a forestry management plan for city-owned land. So apparently that hasn't happened in the past, and you have an opportunity there to take care of those lands and maybe even generate a little bit of income out of it. Transportation. State and local goal. Take care of your transportation network, make it as efficient as possible, and diversify it. Prioritize community and regional needs. This is a big one that, you know, just working with BACs, working with your neighboring communities to make sure that when the state sends you the forms each year that says, what are your transportation needs, that you fill those in and you send them in, because they won't, unless they have a bridge that needs to be replaced, they are not gonna spend a lot of time, unless it's their priority, to come into this community. So make sure they know what your priorities are. Implement high priority elements of the Stillwater Corridor Study. So from College Avenue to Center Street, there was a corridor study that was done in the early 2000s. And some of it has been implemented, but there's a fair amount more, especially the parallel roads that you might want to consider moving a little higher on your priority list. There is a BACS Stillwater study on the books right now that would begin at the interstate and go to College Avenue. I learned in my discussions with the state and with BACS that the reason that's in their plan was in preparation for the bridge replacement. But the bridge replacement is moving a little faster than that corridor study. So I took the liberty of communicating with BACS and the state and said, you two need to get together with the city to make sure everybody's on the same page and you don't end up replacing the bridges with a 2-lane bridge that the corridor study that is completed a year down the road says you need 3 lanes. Okay? So BACS has just offered to meet with officials from the city. They'll invite people from the state to that meeting, and just everybody can sit down and get on the same page about what should happen first and how it should happen. So, so that's in the plan now. It may change by the time that meeting happens, but at least it's acknowledged here. There is a BACS study that explored truck route signage in this community, as well as upgrading of Route 16 to a truck route standards. That hasn't been implemented, but including an action in your plan allows that to move forward and encourages it to move forward. And the same with the traffic signal study that was completed a little bit more than a year ago, that looked at the signal down the street here and a couple up along the corridor to see if there was a way that it could relieve some of the delays in this area. So this incorporates those studies and suggests that those ought to be pursued. And then finally, continue supporting the public bus system and explore adding a bus. Yes, sir.
I was actually gonna ask the city manager this at our next meeting about, I might have mentioned it before, but did somebody cancel Saturday service? Was it Hamden? They canceled Saturday service, so I just didn't know how we could find out what numbers we have on a Saturday. I understand
Yeah.
during the week with university, the students get to,
Sure.
I think that's very important during the week, but I didn't know how much we'd save if we didn't have Saturday, or, I guess I didn't know what that meant, adding an extra bus during the week, or was it adding?
Well, I don't have the numbers or exactly the time frame, but I do know that when Dawn Cooper from BACS was here, and the woman who runs the bus, I forget her name, when they were here back in September, they said that if another bus was added to this run, they could fill it.
Is that was it 6 days a week now, so it's for 6 days a week, the same one, or
Using,
just for the 5?
using the same, they didn't distinguish whether it would require a change in the schedule. So I'm assuming they were talking about the same schedule that you have
That we have
today.
now. I was just curious, because I still don't know what Hamden saved out of it, but I just remember it was, they did it and saved some money, and I didn't know
Yeah,
what kind of numbers we had on Saturdays.
right. Well, those numbers
Yeah.
can be obtained.
Okay. John said he can get that for us.
Yeah, those numbers can be obtained for
Okay.
sure. So,
It was fairly controversial there.
It was, it was, I remember seeing that.
It'd be very controversial
It
there.
would be.
So we do have some big numbers on Saturdays.
But I can get Roger.
I would think you would have some pretty high numbers with students and all.
Yeah, they, it
Okay,
would be
yeah,
controversial.
perfect, thank you.
So that's why the language is a little loosey-goosey, you
Yeah.
know, explore, adding another bus, it doesn't say add one. Okay, this is a state-required wordy, policy. Promote fiscal prudence by maximizing efficiency of state and state aid network by managing land use to maximize efficiency of the system, minimizing vehicle miles traveled, and supporting the livability of the communities. And all of the actions in your transportation section of the plan address this. That's why there are no separate actions to that one. Very important topic of conversation that came up in September was the whole idea of adopting a complete streets policy, which basically says that some of your streets in this community probably ought to be focused on to add more sidewalks, add a bike lane, add bus stops, and just make sure that those facilities are in good shape and are comprehensive in their nature, because that's what Complete Streets does, essentially. And so there's a lot of actions there that suggest how you might do that. The second one, you know, impose impact fees, I know that's probably a controversial topic. I'll plan on drafting a little bit of explanation around that so that it's clearer what is intended there. Creating an asset inventory of your transportation network and identifying, prioritizing those streets that probably ought to be converted to a complete street would be important to do. And I'm gonna say, off the top of my head, it's gonna be your main roads, you know. And linking it to the subdivision and site plan review requirements would mean that if you have somebody who's coming in, proposing a development on a road that's been designated as a complete street road, and they've got an element that's missing, maybe there's no sidewalk, then part of their development condition of approval might be to either pay a fee toward or to implement that portion of the complete street. So those are ways that other communities are doing that. Continue to improve sidewalks, continue improving off-road walking and cycling paths. And then the last one, review and revise the street opening regulations to make sure that they reflect fair practices so that the cost isn't transferred to the taxpayer. So if somebody's coming in and they need to open up the street to hook into something or do whatever, to hook into one of the utilities, lots of times without real clear standards, they just put it back, and it's 2 months later, you've got a depression there in the road, or some other problem comes up. So you want to make sure that your street opening standards allow you to go back to them to pay and to make up what they didn't do right the first time. Safely and efficiently preserve the system, motherhood and apple pie. Those are their 3 state laws: Sensible Transportation Policy Act, the Access Management Law, and the Traffic Permitting Law. Just make sure your ordinances don't conflict with those. That's all it says. Protect, enhance, and promote the rail and aviation systems. Continue pursuing grants from the FAA. Lance is already doing that. work with the railroad, the state and the LLC to determine options for use of the underutilized rail corridor. And Barry, you already brought that up. And it doesn't mean pull it out, it just means let's diversify it. Let's figure out if there's a way that we can use it to increase efficiency. That's it on transportation. Okay. A lot of words. I know. So the future land use plan. This is one of the main reasons why you update a comprehensive plan, to make sure that the zoning ordinance that you're using is consistent with the direction that you're going in. So again, based upon the inventory, the analysis, all the conversations that we've had with different people in this process, there are some suggested changes to your land use section of your plan. In general, we're suggesting that you've already been doing this, but continue to review the number of special exceptions and conditional uses that are allowed on Marsh Island and on French Island, and to the degree that you can, replace those special exceptions and the process that they have to go through with specific standards. So it alleviates administration, or it simplifies it. Suggested at the last meeting was to allow some creative development techniques. We'd have to specify a little bit more what is intended by that. And then there was a statement brought up at the last meeting in late January that making sure that enforcement occurred to avoid any public costs, because sometimes, you know, it's difficult. People want to be able to do what they want to do with their land, and if you enforce too heavily, then you've got a private property rights issue. But if you don't enforce, then you've got a public cost consideration. So it's a balancing act.
So is that the place where you would insert, you know, in the general section, just a description of that balance that you're talking about? Because I think it's important to recognize private property rights, as I said earlier.
Yep. We definitely do that. I thought we could do it here. We could also include it in the vision statement at the beginning of chapter 1. Review the site plan and subdivision regulations to require things like, you know, park in the back instead of in the front. So that way you can reduce your setbacks and have things closer to the road and have it feel more like, you know, a city as opposed to a suburb. Creating parallel interconnected roads and making sure that development that comes in links to existing trails, and to require streetscaping. A comment that was made at the last meeting was to maybe pull together the variety of technical standards that exist today and put them all in one place as a technical manual, making it easier for enforcement and for an applicant to come in and know what he has to do. Adopting standards to protect scenic views, including a very clear statement about how to negotiate with a property owner where they might place their building on the lot so that they're still able to develop, but they do it in a way that preserves the public benefit of that view. Okay? So that's the future, that's one piece in terms of the general layout of the future land use plan. For rural areas, residential first, retain zones R3 and 3A, but develop an impact fee for development west and north of the Stillwater and Penobscot rivers. Again, what I'll probably do is describe that in a little bit more detail, what that means, how it would apply, what it would be for, and it's, you know, it's a one-time thing for new development. Redesignate the R4 at Pushaw Lake to R6 and name it the Lakeside Residential Zone, so that people who now are in the seasonal zone don't have issues when they're trying to either sell or refinance as a seasonal zone. Yep.
No, that can be, I have a standard letter because it's once a month at least.
Yeah,
A lending institute or real estate agent is calling me, and
right, so this'll negate the need for
there'll
that.
still be instances where you could only be seasonal on that lake, but
Sure.
it doesn't reflect what it truly is.
What it is, that's right, that's right. There's land at UMaine, not, yeah. Oh, look at that, your timing is great.
It's on the back side of Perch Pond.
That orange
It's
piece,
basically landlocked, and it's considered R4, seasonal residential,
Where is this,
Where
David?
is,
on the back side of Perch Pond.
Yeah, give me Perch Pond,
Yeah,
what's the
what-
other
where
one?
is-
Thank you.
What is it?
Kinda like the French Island name.
What is
Mud
it?
Pond.
Mud Pond.
yeah, Mud Pond, because then it's called Mud Pond later, and so I didn't know where Perch Pond was, it's Mud Pond
It's the
then.
same.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
do we
So-
wanna call it
We,
I'll call-
we need to call.
perch equals mud?
What?
Perch equals mud.
I think
Or
it's
maybe,
Mud Pond.
maybe put an AKA in
I
there,
will, yeah.
because it is called.
We'll do the same with French Island, because I heard that's
Yeah, that's
really
Treat
Treat and
and
Webster.
Yeah.
Okay, so John's, it's just before, it's just after you go off the bridge, you said? Before the bridge, on the right-hand side?
Before the bridge on the right, and then it,
On
and
the
then
back
it,
side of
On the
Perch
back
Pond.
side?
right.
Okay.
So it's R4 today, and this would propose that it be turned into a resource protection zone, which is what all the yellow is
Oh.
on that map.
Everything but that is, as I say, there's no access to it.
So that would leave the only R4 that you would have would be the city park at Mud Pond.
Right.
Okay? Then,
You may.
I think it's important to add that rezoning that to resource protection doesn't mean that all of it has to stay that way. Through the planning board process, it can, there can be some development in the future if
Sure.
needed.
right.
So it's not locked up
Sure
forever.
there's not an easement on that?
Well, if there is, then that would preclude any.
As in a conservation easement, you mean? Yeah.
If there is, then that precludes it.
Then resource protection is probably a,
It's probably the best thing for it.
appropriate designation.
Although that might not preclude a primitive campsite or.
Right, right.
I'm not sure.
Correct.
We'd have to look at what the easement said. But right now in the city, the resource protection zones are drawn rather arbitrarily, and they can be, you can apply to the planning board with evidence.
I see.
As hydric soils, hydrophytic vegetation, what have you, to
Right.
modify
To
those boundaries.
adjust. Yep,
If it's feasible and it makes sense.
right, right.
Hmm.
I
Good,
don't think in that area you find that.
Okay.
pretty wet.
That's actually fairly good ground up there.
Yeah, that's dry, it's bouldery, but it's dry.
Yeah, but it's high ground, so to designate that as hydraulic soils are not good would be incorrect. There's good ground in there, that's probably why it's not researched.
Could be.
I mean, you know, because UMaine is your largest landholder, and this changes a sizable parcel of theirs, you may want to just send them a note, say, this is what we're thinking, you got any issues with it, just to make sure. The next one, long-term, pursue making Woodland Avenue at Pushaw Lake a public road. That came up at the meeting on the 26th. You know, I think there was recognition that there are a lot of things to juggle and to consider in order for that to happen, but it would allow it to happen if at some point down the road, property owners were willing to do that, and it seemed like it was the right thing to do for everybody concerned. Adopt water quality protection standards in the remaining R4. Probably have those, but, you know, we just want to double check. The landfill, retain the existing landfill zone, but assure that that zone permits recreational uses, not residential, recreational because of that land that, has that been transferred or is still in discussion?
Still in discussion.
Yeah, so this way you'd be ready if it were to be transferred, then you'd have the ability to do some recreational activity there. Okay, at the meeting on the 26th, we suggested, I'll just go over these areas. This map is in chapter 1 of your document, but I wanted to bring it here so that anybody who might be watching it from home could see. The map underneath is the existing zoning map of the community, and we added, my partner and I added these green lines showing that Marsh Island would be the growth area, and that anything west of the interstate would be rural, as well as north of, this is the Orson Island, yeah, Orson Island, and north would be also rural. We also suggested that we have a transition zone that would begin at the interstate, go up the interstate to Gilman Falls Road, essentially maybe a little bit further north than that. And actually just south of Collie Road is here. So going over to Orono Island and then coming back down through the Stillwater River, that would be a transition zone. So the majority of your growth would happen here, maybe a little more in the transition zone, but leaving as much of this rural and open as possible. During that discussion, it was suggested that maybe the corridor between the river and the interstate all the way up to the town line be designated a transition 2 zone. So that's why this is on this map as well. So that would be a third area where growth could happen over time. And this is just the inset of the downtown area, so that would all be growth as well.
Is there a definition of what the transition zone would be or could be?
There would be a definition, yes, and we'd have to explain what that means. So it would be an area that if there were going to be some extensions of water and sewer and other services that could happen in those transition areas if they're not already served, the underlying zoning would still apply, but maybe you wouldn't have as high a density requirement or a density allowance in the transition 1 and 2 as you would in the growth area, for example. Okay.
As I remember from our discussions at that meeting, the T1 area would be the area first, recognizing the desirability of the interstate
Right.
as a potential development resource, and that you would try to, if any future development was to occur in that area, you'd try to focus it on the T1 area, and then later in later years, the area further north, because that's getting further and further away from the core of your public facilities and
Exactly.
utilities. So that was the
And that's the
intention.
whole idea behind it, is to kind of manage your public costs. That's why they're suggested to be tiered that way. In terms of the growth area, Marsh Island was obviously the big one that we're suggesting you retain as your growth area. But we were suggesting that your R2 zone density may be increased to up to 8 dwelling units per acre, which is the minimum amount of density that a transit service can support, a good transit service. So consider that. Revise parking requirements to allow off-site parking so that people, could walk maybe up to 1,500 feet and be able to park in a community lot or something like that. So that way you wouldn't have to have land on site for parking for 6 units or whatever it might be. Revise the uses allowed, as we already talked about. Increase the R5 density to somewhere in the range of 6 to 8 dwelling units per acre. Again, we're trying to focus more growth in that growth area. And then consider reducing the minimum lot size and increasing the density in R3 and R3A on Marsh Island if needed. So leaving R3 and R3A the way they are in the rural area, but trying to increase on where those zones exist on Marsh Island. That's the map I just went over. I don't know what that funny little bubble is in the middle. Just noticed that. Okay. A few more things.
That's a resource protection from the University of Maine.
Oh, okay. Few more things on, with regards to the future land use plan and the growth areas. Designate R1, R3, R3A, and R5 north and south of Stillwater for mixed use. So again, getting back to that thing of, that I talked about earlier in the transportation section. Have your diversified uses so that it's not so auto-oriented. A suggested density of 10 to 12 dwelling units for workforce housing and for traffic congestion management. Designate part of the R1 in Stillwater Village for mixed use with a suggested density. Create a new mill redevelopment district that allows all uses so that you have as much flexibility as you can on that parcel. Expand instead of replace, those were changes that were made last time. Expand the C1, which is your downtown zone. Make sure that it's clearly mixed use that allows residential on upper floors, and those portions of first floors, they may or may not exist today, that do not front on a public way. And then a piece of the discussion last time was include property maintenance requirements in your downtown, so that you can have as high quality a downtown as you possibly can. Guide development of certain uses with standards to minimize conditional and special exceptions. I've already talked about that. And allow for creative development techniques and flexible parking requirements so that if somebody comes in with an innovative way to develop and it makes sense from a planning board perspective and it meets all the purpose statements, then you can allow that. This was a big one that came up at our last conversation, to include in the future land use plan and maybe in chapter 7 or 8, whatever, the 7 on public facilities. Work with RSU 34 on school siting issues in terms of compatibility and co-location of complementary public uses. So if, for example, there's going to be a new middle school someday, then, it should be a decision that is made jointly between RSU 34 and the city. And your plan, having something like that in your plan strengthens the objective to coordinate those decision-making processes.
I guess, why are we assuming that wouldn't happen?
Why are we assuming that it wouldn't or would?
Right. Since we elect people from Old Town to represent Old Town on the RSU board.
Right.
So is there something in the past that's happened that we think that the board wouldn't work?
Yeah,
towards?
I don't know if it's happened here, but in other communities, the state school department has a very heavy say in those ultimate decisions. And so you could end up with a school that's out near Pushaw. I mean, that's a rough example, but because the state school department's rules require such a large amount of land, you want to be able to be in a negotiation process with them. So I think that's really the purpose behind putting a statement like that in and making it clear.
I think it's a good tool to have just for the future.
Yeah.
It's basically one of those things that's telling us something we already know, but
Right.
putting it in the plan to document it.
That's right, that's right.
Exactly, exactly. In terms of your industrial zones, replace the I-1 zone at Expera along the river with a new mill redevelopment district. So I already mentioned, create a new mill redevelopment district and, you know, allow all uses in there. We struck out a couple of ideas that are still in the plan having to do with land use on Gilman Falls Road. I think people felt that the life of those facilities was gonna be longer than the life of this plan, so there was no point in saying anything about those. And then same thing with the I-2 designation at O.J. Folsom, just leave that as is, no issues there. So we are gonna strike those. But at the Energy Park on Penny Road, there's another piece of, there's two zones, there's I-1 and I-2. And the idea was to make it all I-2, so that it's now all one zone, but just make sure that it continues to allow the water pollution control facility in the zone, and does not preclude the ability of cogeneration facilities there. So, that's how we would handle that zone. And then make sure that there's a couple of parcels in downtown that are designated I-2 today, probably where Old Town Canoe used to be, that it's okay now to designate those as C1. So that's what this would reflect.
And that would be a process that would go through the planning board and the council. That's the way that would be accomplished.
Well, what would happen is your plan says it is to be done. And then, when you adopt the plan, now you amend your ordinances.
Right.
And your ordinances can do that in, you know, several steps, or you could revamp the whole thing at once and do one major overhaul. Exactly. So that was it on the future land use plan.
But I think the only reason I mention that is it's important for anybody looking at the plan to realize that there is a process
Yes.
to implement that, and that just the simple acceptance of this plan isn't enough. It's gotta
That's
go
right.
through the planning board and then the council before that's actually
Yes.
done, whether it's done all at once or individually.
Exactly. What was talked about at the last meeting very quickly is that once your plan is adopted, any changes to your land use ordinances, your zoning ordinance, your subdivision, all of those ordinances that deal with the use of land, they have to happen within 2 years of adopting your new plan. Because there's this gap, obviously, if somebody comes in, the plan allows it, but the ordinance doesn't, what do you do with it? How do you approve that? You know what I'm saying? So if you get it done early on, within the first 2 years, you avoid
Well, there
any
aren't-
of those potential
There aren't that
conflicts.
many,
Right,
substantive change, probably could be all done at once.
At once.
yeah, I would
But
think,
I think the council and the planning board need to kind of put their heads together before we
Right,
go through the formal process.
absolutely.
yeah, I think you should be able to complete your update to your ordinances within a year.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, capital and major investment planning and
Here comes the money.
prioritizing. I'm sorry?
I said, here comes the money.
Here comes the money, that's right. So, these first three, after the first statement, those are considerations for prioritizing. You already have some sort of prioritization process, but this captures the essence of making sure that when you make your capital investment decisions, that your highest priorities go to protecting life safety, sustaining the system or facility performance and capability, and meeting compliance directives.
Was this a state requirement to have this stated in the comprehensive plan?
There is a requirement that the state wants you to do a capital investment plan, and so by virtue of that, I don't think they come out and say you have to have a prioritization process, but it's a good idea. So you can change these, but these are pretty standard as a prioritization. A next tier of funding might be to expand your existing public assets, those that will grow revenues for you. You don't want to preclude those, because if they're going to grow revenues, then yeah, you know, you want to be able to do that. And if they're going to be increasing their operational output and productivity, so that, again, you're saving money, that's a good criteria to use. And then finally, you may have some capital investments that, you know, they're a good idea and they're important, but we can't afford them right now, so it's okay if they're not going to cost you too much down the road by deferring them now. You won't be having any negative consequences if you do defer them. So there is no magic bullet to prioritizing, but this is just a framework for you to consider. Once again, we have a state and a local goal. Maintain and improve the city's public facilities and services, plan for, finance, and develop efficient system of public facilities to accommodate growth and development. A policy ensure that Old Town's public facilities and services continue to meet the needs. Develop a 10-year capital improvement plan. Develop annual capital funding plans. Use reserve accounts to dedicate funds for specific capital equipment and facility needs. And I know that you use reserve accounts today, and that's wonderful. A suggestion that I have is to try as much as possible to target some of those pooled funds to the specific uses that you're intending to fund. Just because it makes it easier for the departments and their planning. So, you know, again, that's completely up to the council to decide how they want to do that, but that's a suggestion that we're including in this plan at this point. And then consider the use of bonds for public equipment and facilities that have lifetimes that exceed 20 years, or that have, and or have a value of 500,000 or more. Okay, so those are some criteria. I know some communities will not allow any bonding of anything unless the price tag is X. So if you have that criteria, then you're protecting yourselves, and you know, but you are also allowing yourself to have some room when you need it. And I guess I'm repeating that in the capital and major investment section. However, RSU 34, would you have a capital responsibility? Well, you would. You'd have to help pay your portion of that down the road.
Yes.
So we're done. I can stop talking now and listen to you for a little while. So here, you know, what we're going to do to finish up. We're going to revise it. We're going to fine-tune it, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, get rid of all the typos, and make sure all the page numbers are right, and submit it to the state for review and comment. Then we'll meet with the planning board, have a hearing there. Maybe we can work with the planning board to try to refine the implementation plan and how soon certain strategies ought to happen.
And put together a list of all those ordinances that need to be changed.
Absolutely, absolutely. After which there'd be the council hearing and then begin the implementation process.
How long do the state reviewers have again? I think you told me once.
They have, I believe, 45 days. I don't know how busy they are, but as soon as, you know, it's ready, let's say, I should be able to turn this around and get them a revised copy within a couple of weeks. So, you know, they might have until middle of April at worst, but I think the planning board should try to meet you know, well, we'll have to look and see. I'll talk with them and see if they'll need all 45 days. It would be hard, I think, to have a planning board hearing without having the benefit of their comments.
Right.
Because if they come back and say they
No
want
point.
changes, then, you know, it's, you have to have another meeting, so. I'm done. Yes.
Okay, so on the chapter 1, page 39, just wondering how did we come up with these items, that the project name and then the funding option and all that? Because I wasn't able to make any of the other meetings, so I was just wondering how we came up with these. I see some are, you know, some things are covered as funding, that some of them are covered under operations, some are reserve accounts.
Right,
Like some of these things I think we probably already somewhat have.
right.
So I was just curious how we came
Yeah.
up with a list.
Yep. So first off, what I did is I created a format and asked the staff to
Okay.
tell me
Yep.
what they needed and what the estimated cost would be and how soon they might need it.
Gotcha.
The funding option was me taking a stab
Okay.
at, you know, what I thought made sense based upon my experience, but it can totally be changed.
Yeah,
That's-
no, I was just, because with the reserve and what you said earlier about certain dollar amounts and then for bonds, that's why I was just curious.
Right,
'Cause I know a lot of the stuff, I know like with the chief, he has to buy certain things every year out of his account and stuff, so I understand some of that stuff.
right.
Goes
And I
on.
tried to go with the dollar amount, so
Yeah.
the lower the dollar amount, the more it ought to be in an operational budget versus
Right,
something that, you know, requires reserve account or bonding or
Yeah.
whatever.
no, it's a great list, it makes sense, I was just wondering how we got there.
Yeah.
This is perfect,
And the background for all this, the spreadsheet that I used to create this is gonna be turned over with all the documents, so it'll be a template that you can use year after year and modify as you wish. So-
right. Well, and I mean, back in, I don't know how many years, we stopped using, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we had the equipment list that we would, if it was 2014 and this truck had to be replaced, we replaced it no matter what. We stopped that 3, 4, 5 years ago and started, the department heads have done a great job to extend the life of
Right.
vehicles and
Right.
stuff like that to make it last a little bit
Yeah.
longer.
And the idea of targeting certain pieces of equipment in your reserve account doesn't mean that you have to, you know, buy the ambulance this year.
Right.
If it's still got another good year in it, but the money is targeted, so the
money's
fire
targeted.
chief knows he's gonna get an ambulance in a year or two or whatever.
Yep. No, this is great. I, for one, appreciate everything that you've done, and I think the council
Yeah,
feels the same way.
I think you did a great job. Now, will the, department heads each review their own section and see how that,
I hope so.
yeah, and get back to you to see, because, I mean, there's some
Yes.
things that we wouldn't know.
Right.
Right,
And, you know, as I told you before, I had some, just typos and corrections.
yes,
That you wouldn't know, because you don't live here, like, it really is Gilman Falls Avenue, and you call it Gilman Falls Road and Gilman Falls Avenue.
yes, yes.
And things like that, and I did
Yes.
mark those and some of the other
Good.
things, but, and they're a little, you know, that's why it's important that the department heads read it too, for some
Absolutely.
inconsistencies.
Absolutely, yes, I appreciate that, because as you're, you know, as you say, I don't live here and I can easily
Yeah,
interchange.
well,
Well, it's
yeah.
like you said,
Yeah.
with like with the French Island and then the
Right.
mud pond, and I mean, some of the stuff that
Exactly.
we.
Yep.
So, and I think Ted asked the question or something, when is the finalized draft date that you need back from the department heads and us as far as that?
Tomorrow?
So working all night,
If-
huh?
No, that was
Well,
yesterday, it's been revised.
Is that right?
It was yesterday. but not
Yeah, I
tomorrow.
mean, if the goal is, you know, according to the schedule, and we can, you know, obviously the schedule is flexible, but the goal was to have a plan adopted by April, or in April.
Oh, okay.
So that didn't factor, we're a little bit behind, that didn't factor all of the time necessary for the state to review. So it'll probably be by the end of May is what we'd extend it to at this point. So to me, you know, if there are gonna be any additional changes that the staff wants to make, or anybody on the council and the planning committee wants to make, I need it within the next week. I need
Yeah.
it within the next week,
Yep.
so that then I have a week to make those final changes and send it off to the state.
Right. Yeah.
There.
Oh, that's great. And then so then it would go to the state and then the planning
Planning
board and then the
Planning board.
council, so we could get this done by May?
Well, it's possible. If the state gets
Provided-
back to us, depends on what the state, if they come back with a huge amount of change, I imagine it would take longer, but I can't imagine that they would.
Yeah, I doubt they will. I doubt they will.
It's pretty, you know,
So it'd go to your board in May and then come right to the council,
yeah.
all the same
Or
month.
in April.
Yeah,
You might be able,
I
you might
mean,
be able to do it in April.
And the format of that, of course, would be up to the council, if you want the planning board to present it to the council, or, however you wanna do it.
I'm assuming it'd have to go in front of their board first to vote on it, and then it would come to the council?
Yeah, the planning board has to recommend
Recommend.
adoption
Okay,
of the plan to the council. That's the way that, it's laid out in the state law.
so if everything went great, the planning board could do that at their meeting in April, and then it comes right to the council in
Right.
April, and it could be at the council's second meeting in April to do it. When you guys meet in April, when,
Well, second Tuesday.
yeah, so then it would come to us on the third Monday. Everything, if it goes along with the
Yeah.
state and everything
Yep.
goes well. So I'm sure we'd go to the planning board meeting anyways to make sure everything's okay. Perfect, done a great job, everybody's done a great job with this. David, appreciate everything you've done with this.
It's been really good to work with everybody in the community and to get the good feedback that we've gotten so far. You know, if there's I's and T's that need to be swapped or whatever, you know, that's where, this is where we're at right now.
Right, and then we can get that in a week, anything that you already have, it. Yeah.
Well,
Hey,
One point, I'd certainly like, having been involved with this from the beginning for the comprehensive plan committee, is Kat has really prompted us to get as much public involvement as possible, and I was skeptical that we'd get very much.
Right,
I was very pleasantly surprised at the amount of input that we had, both in promoting it, Old Town, Our Town, and then the expos that we had pretty good public participation at those.
that was the table talk stuff there.
At the public
Yeah,
library,
okay,
yeah.
yeah. They
And
said
as
it was
well
a
as the
good-
second meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So, I know you were very good, just a cheerleader to get us, you had to kick us in the butt a couple times, but her contribution was crucial to getting as much public involvement as we did,
It's
which
been a lot
was
of-
much better than I thought we'd get.
a lot of positive feedback, I'm assuming.
And good additions,
Yeah.
good additions to things that we had left out, and that's the whole idea around getting the community involvement, because we don't live here, we don't know
Right.
all the ins and outs, so it's good. Yeah.
One of your earlier slides on natural resources, you had continue to monitor conflict,
Yes,
and was that with the Penobscots?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. On the river water quality issue. I know, like I said, I know some of that has gotten resolved, but it may not all be over.
Try to take a somewhat neutral
Yeah,
position on that, because
Right.
they're part of the community, and
exactly. Yep.
I will monitor it.
Just two last things for me anyways. A lot of the stuff with the zoning changes and all that, like you were saying, like, hopefully get this done in 2 years, that's really you guys and Dave doing a lot of this stuff
Yeah,
over the next couple of years, just implementing that.
yeah. Well, and we may explore the possibility of, at least for some of them, putting them together in a kind of one shot.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
That we would then, because it is part of the, assuming it's approved by the state and all this, part of the comprehensive plan, we adopt those changes that everybody's agreed on, and then send it to the council as one package, so
There you
you
go.
aren't piecemealing this over the next 2
2
years.
years, okay, that was my concern,
So
that it
we
was
do
gonna,
that.
you guys would be meeting every month over little bit by little bit.
No,
so you
hopefully
would-
we can consolidate this
Right.
quickly, if some of the, almost all of those changes are no-brainers.
Right,
So it shouldn't be any problem. One thing that did come up is someone in Public Works mentioned that the city owns, several hundred acres of forest land. There's nothing being done with it now, and that was part of the recommendation of a forest management committee.
Oh, I see.
And developing a forest management plan. I'm a forester. I wasn't even aware, after all these years, yet they had that much land that should be assessed.
Is that all in one area? Or is that spread out?
It's in several
all over?
areas.
Okay.
But it's a fairly significant resource. I'm led to believe it's several hundred acres, more than that.
Wow.
So that's something to explore. And I'd certainly be interested in helping out with that committee.
Right.
You know,
That's a great idea. The only other one I had was when you talked about, I know Council Roach has always said about a strategic plan, so some of this would fall into that, as you mentioned before the meeting even
Absolutely.
started.
Absolutely.
So that helps us out with that.
Yeah, once, at the next planning board meeting, once I get all the comments back from the state, I will prepare a separate list of all the ordinance changes that are suggested. I'm gonna prepare a separate list of the capital improvements that are absolutely required in order to keep the city functioning.
Right.
That's a state requirement. And what I hope to have the planning board focus on is the tables in chapter 1 that identify how soon a priority each of the actions are, so that you can
very
break
nice.
that down.
Nice.
A high priority strategy, for example, is, in my mind, or the way this is drafted, occurs within the next 3 years. But in that 3-year time frame, there might be some things that you want to definitely accomplish year 1, other things year 2, so you create a work plan. That then you revisit that work plan every year and see how much progress you've made, what needs to be carried over, what can cross off the list. Maybe there's something new that you didn't anticipate that needs to come onto the list.
Okay.
So we'll work on that at that planning board meeting as well.
That's great. And the committee, the whole comprehensive plan committee as well, you guys did a great job with this. It's fantastic. Sorry it took us so long to get to this point as far as getting everybody together. Or almost everybody, I should say.
You've had a few things to juggle in the past year since I've been here, so perfectly understandable.
Perfect. Guys, any questions?
we, those of us on the committee and all the volunteers certainly appreciate the council's attention, here tonight to help us get this wrapped up.
Yeah, this is great. It really is. Nice job.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Thank
Good.
you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.
We'll keep rolling.